Looking through my countless first and third-party 5e monster books, looking for the perfect monster can be like looking through my entire wardrobe and deciding I just have nothing appropriate to wear to the event. While I didn't start playing 5e this way, in the last few years, I usually find myself tinkering with a monster stat block at least a little bit, to the point where it's actually rare for me to run a monster straight out of the book. Over time, I've started gathering my own little manual of new monsters for my campaign, and now you can use them in yours. My name is Byrne, and these are 4 new monsters that you can employ in your Dark Fantasy D&D campaign.
Children scare easily, but sometimes it pays to listen closely to their wild imaginings. The monster living in their closet could be more than a mere nightmare.
Darklings are fey creatures who love making their lairs in dark and quiet places, which usually means the large hollows of ancient trees or the long abandoned ruins of castles. Darklings tend to live far from civilized places, making them mysterious and rare to encounter. However, they are malicious trickster spirits who enjoy frightening and tormenting commoners who are unfortunate enough to attract a Darkling's attention. A Darkling may wind up inside a commoner's home because their house is built from the timber of a tree the Darkling was living inside of. The Darkling will take up residence beneath the stairs, inside of a cupboard, up in the attic, or beneath the floorboards. The house's residents hear scratching noises and snickering from the Darkling's hiding place. House pets are butchered and left on display, and candles or firewood go missing, making it impossible to light a fire within the house. Commoners also refer to Darklings as bogies or bogeymen, and sometimes don't even realize there's a creature living with them at all, telling their children there's no such thing as monsters who live in closets. When a Darkling tires of tormenting its hosts, it may choose to murder them and detach their shadows, which become its new playmates instead. Darklings living in wildernesses can be responsible for missing travelers, and are occasionally dispatched by the Unseelie courts to kidnap children and leave behind a Wexelkin. If you or your party are fortunate enough to slay a Darkling, 1d4 vials of blood can be salvaged from a single Darkling, which is a black, oily substance. A vial of Darkling blood can be poured onto a fire that fills a space no larger than a 5-foot cube. Doing so instantly extinguishes the flames, including magical or illusory flames that produce light. A character proficient with alchemist supplies can also use Darkling blood to make a potion of dark vision, which provides dark vision to a creature for 60 feet and for 8 hours, no concentration required. The Darkling is a creature I was inspired to make, desiring more unseelie fae that may inhabit dark woods or dungeons where my players might explore. I was further inspired by reading mythology about boggarts, some of which I incorporated into the Darkling's lore and design. And desiring the Darkling to be able to protect itself from a group of adventurers, I gave it the ability to bring the party's shadows to life, which would in turn defend the Darkling against our heroes. I created a new detached shadow stat block as well, which is very typical of me making small adjustments to a normal stat block, as the detached shadow is very similar to the standard shadow from the main 5e rules. I probably could have just used that instead. The difference is I didn't want the Darkling to use undead as servants, as I don't associate fae with undead at all, and in fact almost think of the two creature types as mortal enemies. So while tinkering to change the shadow from an undead creature, I decided to make its strength drain into a charisma drain instead, feeling a little bit more fae-ish, and I gave it the perfect mimicry ability. I think this fits really well with the Darkling being a trickster, able to steal shadows, and the shadows themselves can then play tricks on their hosts. It also reminded me of the first scene from Peter Pan, where he has to reattach his escaped shadow, so it seemed suitably fae-ish to me. Not written into the stat blocks of either the Darkling or the shadow shadow, but similarly to how undead 5e shadows work, if a creature dies from the psychic damage of either a detached shadow or a darkling, their shadow becomes permanently detached and a creature in its own right. So maybe your darkling already has an army of shadows serving it when your party encounter it.
Common wisdom tells travelers to stay on the road and avoid dark places. As long as you don't go searching for danger, it cannot find you. Danger stalks from within the trees, and it absolutely will chase you down the road.
Manhunter spiders are a terrifying breed of giant spider that get their name from actively hunting their prey rather than creating a webbed lair for food to just wander into. Manhunters stalk their prey like a pack of lions, hiding among thick foliage or up on cave ceilings before dashing forward and injecting venom through their huge fangs. Manhunters are also shockingly fast, able to run down a horse or a buffalo at full gallop. Their common diet includes stags, goats, horses, and of course, common folk if one is unfortunate enough to fall prey. It is wise to remain mounted and on the road in thickly forested areas where manhunter spiders are known to stalk. Yet even that can fail to be any protection from these appalling creatures who love to give chase and catch fast-moving targets. If caught by a man-eater's fangs, one is best to flee from the saddle and hope the spider is content with the horse. Yet even then, escape may be difficult as the spiders tend to hunt in groups of 2 or even 3. Careful harvesting of the manhunter spider's venom glands with a DC 14 wisdom survival check can yield enough venom to create a vial of spider venom. Spider venom is a poison that must be applied through injury with a slashing or piercing weapon. Much like the spider's bite attack, the poison inflicts 2d8 poison damage on a failed DC 13 Constitution saving throw, or half as much on a successful one. However, the poison effect is only applied for a single attack, so most warriors who make use of it have a pre-dipped arrow or coated dagger specifically for inflicting the poison. You can also, using 50 gold pieces of additional components and 2 hours of working time with a poisonous kit, create an antidote instead, which is basically a potion of cure poison, I think it's called. I had the idea for the Manhunter during a collab I did with Dale on her channel, where we created a D&D campaign setting based on Australian things. The Huntsman spider is a famously terrifyingly huge spider that's found in most parts of Australia. Now, fortunately, they're not particularly dangerous to humans, but I know I feel my stomach drop whenever I see one, and most folks living in Australia have at least one story of dealing with a huntsman spider to disastrous effects. Huntsmans also get their name because they don't spin webs. Instead, they chase their food down and pounce on them like a hunter. This makes for a great 5e monster because it doesn't sit and wait for players to wander into its webbed lair. Most players know to expect trouble as soon as you describe something as being encased in spider web, whether it's a cave tunnel or a tree or something else. Instead, you can use the Manhunter spider to ambush the party as a wandering monster in a forest, cave, or a dungeon. It's deliberately got a huge movement speed so it can catch up with pretty much everything, including a riding horse. It has great stealth, so there is a good chance that it could ambush the party, and its terrifying presence is intended to reflect how I generally feel whenever I'm confronted with a huntsman.
Best not wander into the fog, friend. There are creatures that surround themselves with it, waiting for fools like you to lose their way within.
Müklac are aggressive fey creatures that haunt swamps, caves, graveyards, or ravines, places which they blanket with a thick, silvery fog. The Müklac are almost elemental with winter fog, their bodies emanating white mist like steam rising from a hot spring. When they snarl, the fog escapes from between their teeth like smoke from a dragon. Müklac swath themselves within the fog, hiding within it to ambush hapless wanderers and disappearing again before they can be retaliated against. While not the most intelligent of Feyre, Müklac do have a vicious cunning and use their environmental advantage to deadly effect. If confronted by a group of adventurers, the Müklac will evade knights and armored foes through the mist to attack those that wish to remain at range, to shoot arrows or cast spells. Müklac can be reasoned with if one is familiar with the Sylvan speech, but what they desire most is flesh and bone to grind between their teeth. Therefore, they will take no less than a carcass large enough to feed their entire pack to be persuaded not to attack folks traveling through their mists. Müklac often guard the ancient places that lead into the court of the Unseelie Queen, leading to the folk tale that many misty places, forests or valleys, must lead into the realm of the Fae. Most often, this is simply a winter fog on a cold morning that clears by midday, but no wary traveler enters such places lightly. Mist continues to waft from the remains of a Müklac for some time after their death. A character proficient with alchemist's supplies can use 5 pairs of Müklac lungs to craft an ever-smoking bottle. Doing so requires a DC 15 intelligence check using alchemist supplies, 200 gold pieces of extra components, and 4 hours of uninterrupted work. Salvaging a Müklac's lungs requires a DC 12 survival check for each Müklac. It's a foglet from The Witcher 3, and that's probably all the B-roll that Dante's used, is just shots of foglets. They're among my favorite Witcher monsters, and I haven't seen anything like them elsewhere, so I decided to do my own take on them for 5e. Looking at the stat block for the Müklac, it obviously needs to be used in groups. I wasn't trying to design a boss monster here. You can use them as an alternative to goblins or kobolds as a low threat early level encounter. Hopefully, they'll catch your players by surprise and delight, as your players are unlikely to have faced similar creatures playing low level 5e before. Müklac also have great environmental mystery potential. Their presence hinted at wherever there is thick fog, but thick fog isn't associated instantly with a monster like spider webbing can be. Dispelling the fog, which has nestled on a crossroads and is causing folk to disappear within, might be the very reason why the party were hired in the first place. Müklac make for great lesser encounters in Fae-themed dungeons as well, perhaps protecting a minor treasure or an entrance into the Fae realm, which they've blanketed in thick mist.
Not all monsters eat their food raw. In fact, some can take quite a taste for prepared dining. It makes recovering its victims' bodies a real problem.
While ogres and gremlins can eat raw flesh, and many happily do, some grow a fondness for cooked stews, slow roasts, and blood jellies. A Carnifex is the title given to one such ogre, who learns how to prepare their food by stripping, salting, and cutting it into meaty chunks. While nothing really differentiates an Ogre Carnifex from others of their kind, except perhaps intelligence and creativity, which can admittedly make them quite a bit more dangerous. Ogres usually wield simple weapons like a crudely made cudgel, a morning star, or a battle axe appropriate for their size. Carnifexes carry large meat cleavers, which are intended for chopping their victims to bits, but are equally effective when used to attack or defend themselves. These cleavers are blood-stained, notched from cutting into bones, and so massive they can be swung in wide arcs that slice through more than one combatant at a time. Carnifexes can also be quite popular among their kindred, similar creatures such as gremlins or trolls, all of whom grow a similar taste for finer dining than their usual meals on the go. This makes Carnifexes even more of a threat, as they are rarely alone and in fact attract other monsters to themselves through their cooking. Of course, fine dining is relative to ogres, and the stench of their stews and roasts can be unbearable. There is little that an Ogre Carnifex would keep on them that a typical adventurer would want to make use of. However, due to preparing their food, the Carnifex will usually strip a victim of their armor, clothes, and personal possessions, which it disposes of, having no further use for it. Exploring the lair of a Carnifex or somewhere close to where it has been cooking may discover an entire pile of discarded possessions that might yield valuables from the remains of would-be monster slayers, captured merchants, or just unfortunate travelers. The Ogre Carnifex was inspired by this miniature that I painted from my collection a couple of years ago. My imagination was captured by this unique looking ogre wielding two massive meat cleavers. I liked that the cleavers were of differing sizes as well, which inspired the two attacks of the stat block, as one having a close range and the other having reach. The hope is to catch unwary player characters who don't pay close attention to the monster's description by surprise, reaching them with an attack even though the character is trying to keep their distance. The sweeping cleave was added as an extra ability to catch a party that rushes the Carnifex off guard, and also generally raises the deadliness of this monster. The idea is that it grips the long cleaver with both hands and just kind of spins around on the spot like some sort of video game monster. Between its sweeping cleave and the stench from its cooking which clings to the monster, the danger of the Carnifex is raised quite a bit when compared to a regular ogre. You can make the Ogre Carnifex the boss monster of an early dungeon filled with goblins or other minions that enjoy the Carnifex's cooking. Chambers that you might include in this dungeon is the abattoir, with cut up and skinned bodies hanging on hooks from the ceiling, the floor utterly drowned beneath wet and half-dried blood. You could feature the treasure room, mentioned as part of this monster's stat block, filled with minor treasures and maybe a few major ones. And the kitchen itself, where the massive cauldrons could be bubbling, and each could also have the Ogre Carnifex's stench trait, so it's hard for the player characters to escape the smell of the ogre's terrible cooking. You could even play out that the stench clings to the party's clothes after they've left the dungeon, and for the next 24 hours they have disadvantage on all charisma checks except maybe intimidation until the stench dissipates. Of course, they could always clean it away with prestidigitation. Stupid prestidigitation. The Carnifex can also act as a more engaging side threat in a higher level dungeon, making them the personal chef of the actual big bad evil monster of that lair. Maybe a dragon or a giant gains a particular liking for a Carnifex's cooking. So those are 4 new monster stat blocks which you can use in your dark fantasy game of 5e, and if you want to deploy them against your players, you'll find them through a link down in the description to this video. They're completely free to access. And speaking of things that are completely free, these stat blocks were all made using the Home Brewery, which is a fantastic resource for 5e creators, or if you just want to homebrew some monsters and want them to look like how stat blocks are laid out in official publications. It makes them, at least for me personally, a lot easier to run when they just look the same as any stat block. Speaking of monsters, if you want to learn how to make other types of monsters formidable in your D&D campaign, you should check out this video up here that we did on giants and how to make them truly terrifying threats, or come hang out with Super Geek Mike and myself as we discuss the monsters and the monster hunting from the 2004 monster movie classic Van Helsing.